welcome back to another episode of the Retail Perch, and we've got an exciting lineup here today for you. But this is the middle of April. Typically, today would have been the day you'd be paying your taxes or scrambling to pay your taxes. But it's an odd year, right? It's been an amazing year. The IRS has actually extended the deadline to, I believe, May 17th this time, or something like that, right?
Yeah.
Some odd date like that. So, normally I would be buried in my office scrambling to make sure I get my taxes into the IRS. But here we are today recording a podcast. And of course, it's great to have our amazing, my co-host, Gary, you're more than a co-host. I don't even know what to call you, right? So, I guess if you start the introduction, you're the host and I'm the co-host. But here you are, my good friend Gary Hawkins on the Retail Perch. Welcome, Gary.
Shekar, great to be with you again today.
And do you want to introduce our guest here today, Gary?
Sure. So we've got today with us Jon Stine, head of the Open Voice Network. And I'm going to turn it over to him and let Jon introduce himself and tell us a little about the Open Voice Network and the work he's doing there.
Gary, thank you. Shekar, thank you. Thanks for the opportunity, and greetings to everyone here from Portland, Oregon. Jon Stine, and I'm the executive director, serving as the executive director of what's called the Open Voice Network. It's a nonprofit industry association dedicated to developing standards, developing usage models, developing ethical use guidelines and privacy guidelines in the world of voice assistants. But I think the interest here in this podcast is, it's about voice. And I mean, standards and all that, very important. But I come from retail, and I started my career about 15 years in the apparel business, department stores, better sportswear, 7th Avenue. And this whole idea of the Open Voice Network and the pursuit of standards for voice assistants really came out of a conversation that was really commerce centric. I was with Intel Corporation at the time and heading sales and strategy for Intel's outreach to the retail and consumer goods and hospitality communities, and was with some friends at MIT in 2016. And I thought we're having coffee in the morning. I had appointments midday in the afternoon. I thought we'd be talking about, what do Bostonians talk about in the summer? About the Red Sox and the weather and, things like this. And instead, one of the professors raised his latte and said, I'd really be interested. And there were maybe 5 or 6 of us around the table. I'd be really interested in your opinions as to what technology over the next 5 to 7 to 10 years, so long term, what technology may most reshape the relationship between a retail brand or a direct-to-consumer brand and those consumers? What might change, and again, a lot of different things going on, but what might change the relationship, really alter it? And, we go around the table, and this is 2016, and I know Gary's a technology expert, and Shekar, you are as well. And, think of all the usual suspects at a table in 2016. Well, of course, someone has to mention IoT. Someone has to mention artificial intelligence, AR, VR, of course, and on and on and on. And it came around the table, and I just been reading some things about this Alexa thing. Didn't have one, but realized, my goodness, here's a incredible retailer with easy payment mechanisms, with a remarkable merchandising assortment that now can exist right in someone's kitchen or living room. I thought, oh my goodness. And so I said, well, this voice thing, I don't know much about it, but this voice thing impresses me. One thing led to another. We did, combined with a consulting firm, we did a white paper on it, presented it at NRF. One thing led to another, and found myself in front of the CEO of a major US retailer and talking about this voice thing and where this might go. Again, this is, down the road. And he turned to me and said, well, this is kind of the wild, wild west, isn't it? This is a technology that could be really important But gosh, are there any standards? How do we handle the data? Who owns the data? Do the technologies interoperate? Well, sir, not really, and no. And he said, well, it'll take some standards, won't it? I said, yes, sir, absolutely. And then he turned to me and said, well, who's going to do it? And a year later, I left Intel, and we've been forming the Open Voice Network. So, Gary, that's a long-winded answer to your good question. I'm sorry for prattling on, but that's the background. That's how it got started.
That's great. That's absolutely fascinating to understand how some of these things sort of come into being, and the potential long-range impact they can have. You brought up Alexa, and certainly I think Amazon was probably the first, at least big player to promote voice and bring a voice-based product service into the market here. But obviously this is going a lot of other places fast. Well, what are some of the interesting things you're seeing application-wise and so on around retail?
I think, Gary, it gets to, and let me answer your great question in this way. I think it gets to our understanding of where value is created in retail. Because a lot of people will say, oh goodness, well, this voice thing, we've got a smart speaker, we should transact with it. Why isn't it creating sales for us? Or how do we create sales with it? Well, voice assistances can be as simple, not that any of it is simple, the technology is very complex, but in customer service, in the call center, voice bots. When's the store open? When will my order be shipped? And especially with the whole movement to, really a digital retailing, the need for that kind of knowledge in customer service, bots don't have a bad day, right?
Yeah. No,
Bots just
true.
don't have a bad day. And you're plugged and they feed from APIs from your data. They're going to be very accurate.
Right.
There's been some academic research that if a bot speaks like this, it becomes even more believable, kind of like the old computers in the Jetsons, more believable than a human voice because it's coming from a computer. That's one area.
What is this curve? I forget what this curve is called. It's tied to robotics and AI. When it's really tied to dolls, right? When dolls become overly human, there's a creep factor at some point, right? You got to keep it sufficiently machine-like where it doesn't creep you out and you feel like you're talking to a real person.
Absolutely,
So,
absolutely. Yeah. But it's one example of where voice, just an interactive voice response, an IVR,
right.
And they are being perfected and perfected. That's a place where voice can create a lot of value, and yet it's not part of the transaction. Really impressed by what a number of folks are doing to explore voice search with mobile devices. A lot of the voice experts will say, hey, keep in mind, boys and girls, we can speak 3 times faster than we can type, but we can read twice as fast as we can listen. So think of, what about voice search on your mobile app? What about voice search within, your laptop app or your standard website? So there's a lot of different places where this technology, can come into play before we start thinking about, I want to order my groceries.
Yeah.
But that's also out there in front of us. That's also out there.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I want to go back. Gary, go ahead.
So Jon, do you see the day coming, and if you do, give us some sense what you think that timeline looks like when voice is going to replace, the keyboard as our primary means of interacting with technology, with our computer systems and so on?
Gary, it's the question, I think, for all of us, and especially as we're thinking about advising the investment, as you and Shekar do, of, when should we plan on this? I think in the immediate being 3 to 5 years, it will complement. and it will be a complementary interface.
Mhm.
But we will see it grow very rapidly in automobiles. In fact, voice in auto is one of the fastest growing areas. Turn on my car, turn, play Spotify, play Pandora, play my list, show me the directions, tell me the directions, or guide me to the such and such. In a hands-free environment, it's a natural interface.
Yeah.
And in those situations, it's going to grow rapidly. Another area it's going to grow rapidly is just in smart manufacturing and operations. Is, in a sense, your smart factories talking to you.
Yeah.
Yeah. In fact, you're right.
In the language you need.
You need. Yeah. I don't remember the last time I actually typed in directions or search for an address. I'm speaking to my phone most of the time, or my car, right?
You're speaking to your phone, your car.
Yeah. Go home, and that's it. It knows where home is and gets me there. Yeah. So I have a question. Rewind to your earlier thing. You're talking about, the setting up of a standards body to set up guidelines. So, so you have, in technology, of course, there's plenty of these bodies which set up, whether it's a TCP/IP standard or the Bluetooth standards. So are you talking about a similar type of body which has these RFCs that puts it out, and there's revisions to it that get accepted by a wider community, or are these are they usage guidelines, or and also include technology guidelines? Or
great question, and let me get into that. We are right now, we define ourselves as, we'll be making proposals to the great standards bodies, the W3Cs, the IEEEs, the IETFs, etc. And there's voice work that's gone on, especially in W3C, for years. In fact, we have a number of individuals who have been driving voice-related standards through and with W3C. But there are some other areas, and that, again, this is, the more we explore, the more we realize, gosh, we're getting into some real white, open, bare canvas type stuff. For instance, the whole area of voice data. Well, voice will give you, I want to order coffee and milk and eggs. Okay, that will tell you coffee, milk, and eggs. But then it can also reveal the sentiment that I say that. Well, coffee, I think, milk, and eggs. Well, there's confidence on eggs, but there's a little hesitation on coffee and milk. How does a retailer respond? Because you can respond in real time. But then voice can also, is a biometric. It can identify me with high degrees of accuracy. It's also a biomarker. There's research going on right now that voice, with a 40-second clip of voice, can be identifying mental illness, physical illness. In fact, we're just on a presentation this morning talking about all the medical, it's not a diagnosis, but leading indicators.
Right.
Well, this is data that all of a sudden you're a retailer.
Right.
What do we do with that data?
Right.
There's legal and regulatory guidance. The EU just published a brilliant paper on how you apply GDPR to voice, but they just, from our estimation, they kind of scratched the surface. Didn't talk about biomarkers, didn't talk about sentiment, didn't talk about all these things that, are out there within voice data. Shekar and Gary, I mean, this is wild, wild west stuff.
No, this is really interesting, because there's really only three big voice assistants out there, well, four if you include Cortana, right? So
Western world,
in the Western world, right? So you have Amazon, you have Google, you have Apple, and I guess you can say you have Microsoft, although I think Microsoft is retiring Cortana. Because they're the intermediaries, right? So essentially they have the voice recognition engines, which is converting it into natural language and then calling an API that you register with them. So they still carry the raw data. So who is controlling? Because I think one of the things you talked about is who owns the data, right? Because it's two things. One is the retailer's API is being called, or whatever service is actually returning the information. but it's being relayed through this intermediary that's actually conveying it, translating your voice into text and text back into voice, right? And who owns that data? Is that data going to be preserved and is it going to be used? Are there any T's and C's around that, right? And do you have the ability to go in and say, delete all my voice records? And if it's transcribed, does that mean the transcribed records will also be deleted, or it's just your voice data? I mean, there's all these, I guess, questions you get into. Huge, right?
Huge issues. And if I may say, the issue of, let's call it commercial data ownership, is for the retail industry and all consumer facing industries. Just think about healthcare, for instance. Financial services is one of the driving forces behind the Open Voice Network, and also the remarkable growth, still quiet, but the remarkable growth of, let's call them independent voice assistant system developers. Firms by the name of SoundHound or Raza, consulting firms by the name of Rain, are all kind of growing, kind of underneath the covers. Microsoft has turned most of their Cortana work into developing, let's call it private brands for enterprises. Right. If you look under the covers of Beeb, which is the BBC voice assistant, you're going to find an awful lot of Microsoft Azure and cognitive AI work. So there's a real shift going on, and the shift is predicated largely by who owns the data and who's going to use it, who has the rights to it.
Right.
We just completed a study of a line-by-line analysis of the data privacy policies of 5 big tech firms. I'll just say it's quite interesting. I'll leave it at that.
I think your expression said a lot more than that.
It's quite interesting, and if I had more hair, some of my hair might stand on end.
Right.
It's quite interesting, and especially if, again, think of yourself as a chief merchant or a CEO of a retailer.
Right.
Yeah. No. So some of the issues you're bringing up are just massive in scope, and I think probably way beyond what most people have even thought about relative to voice and how this whole space, is going to continue to develop. There's absolutely a lot of implications here for retail, but as you're pointing out, it goes way beyond simply, hey, I need to order some milk, juice, and eggs today.
Right. It goes way beyond that. We're doing one of the things we're doing right now, and it'd be fascinating to talk about this with you guys because, offline, but we're doing a study of, if you start with a clip, maybe a 60-second clip of voice, and Gary, we're asking the question this way: what are all the things we could know about Shekar? What are the things we think we could know about him? What cohorts might we put him in? Again, thinking if we were just retail marketers.
Yeah.
And it's this list that goes on. I mean, I'm in the second slide in about 14-point type of trying to list all this stuff out. And that was before I heard the presentation this morning about all the analysis of all the health issues that now can be at least leading indicators. To the point where someone would say, you should go in and see your physician.
Right.
That's amazing. So, I mean, so clearly there's issues. Well, I can't say issues. There's things to be dealt with from a technology adoption.
Things to be dealt with.
Dealt with, right? From a and I think that's true for really most technologies. There's got to be a standards body. There's got to be guidelines. There's got to be understanding of risk, ownership of data, rights of the consumer, all of that stuff. But let's look at the other side, which is, some people might say the bright side of things, which is what can it enable, right? What can voice enable in terms of richness of interaction experience from a customer perspective, and just purely, adding, value to and ease of interaction, right? And I'm seeing voice, get into Samsung refrigerators, to your voice assistants, to everything. And I think, obviously, for people, you don't have to learn the technology when you have to use a voice assistant, right? You just speak, you do stuff that you do naturally. There's no interface to learn. There's no phone app to pick up and do. You just like talking to another person. So, I mean, it seems like there's exciting possibilities, right? When,
Oh,
when you speak. And what do you see in terms of, some of those possibilities? Talk to us.
It's remarkable possibilities. And that's what really got, again, I was coming at this from a retailer's perspective, advising retail companies, working in technology with retailers, and from a Garmento's apparel background, how do we create value? And two things to your great question. The first is there's been an awful lot, one of the buzzwords in the industry here over the last 2 to 3 years has been, we've got to create frictionless commerce, right? Yeah. We find friction, reduce it, eliminate it, take friction out of the decision journey.
Right.
I can speak 3 times faster than I can type.
Yep. And to the point you made earlier, voice is a biomarker, and authentication, you've just eliminated one of the big headaches with payment, right? I've now authenticated that transaction biometrically and should be able to get card present rates, not have to bother with card not present and all that risk.
Absolutely. And let's say that I have that set up. I also am a member, say, of a Walmart or a Best Buy kind of subscription service, and that data's on file. Right. And consumption and transaction becomes as simple as saying yes. I was teaching a class in a local university, and one of the students raised his hand and said, I love voice. Why do you love voice? I order beer and chips, and all I say is, give me beer, give me chips. Done. Shipped to my door. And right. all the steps that the industry has taken in fulfillment, in digital ordering, and managing inventories, and all that, this is the easiest interface ever. Put it in the kitchen. I've got mine in the kitchen.
Right. I mean, the only shortcut I can think is the Neuralink, where you just think it and you get it, right?
Yeah. So, a USB plug in your head,
That's right.
But
yeah.
But
you don't want to get me half the things I'm thinking about. Trust me.
We might all get arrested, right?
Right. Yeah.
But it provides. It's the first thing. Some of the voice theorists say we are, as humans, we're voice first. It's the first thing we did even before walking. We are uttering sounds, and so our ability to say, gosh, what are we having for dinner tonight? Let's order such and such. It's right there.
Right. I think it's very clear, right? So you've obviously heard about Clubhouse. It's been a sensation over the last couple of months, and it's a voice-only platform. And I think one of the things that's so thrilling and amazing about Clubhouse is the fact that you get to hear and interact with voices, as opposed to having to type on a chat or private forum. And I think there is so much more, because we've been trained to educate and to understand tonality and emphasis on voice and all of that stuff, where you can really read between the lines when you're listening to somebody, as opposed to when they're typing something out in an email, right? So
without question,
exactly.
question, and you raise a great point, because I think there's, if you will, the frictionless part of voice, the hands-free part of voice. Think, for instance, of just a voice-enabled professional picker, your Instacart picker, your Kroger order picker. I see them walking around my local Kroger. They're using, clipboards, check marks.
Right.
But then also, I think there's another part of this, and we talked about the downside of data. Let's talk about the upside of the remarkable opportunity of data. Let's just say anonymized sentiment analysis of your call center.
Right.
Are they happy or are they angry? What are they angry about? And in a sense, voice gives you the opportunity for an immediate, not just 15 people in a room, it's tens of thousands focus group.
Right.
There is, and you can begin, again, anonymize it, destroy it after you immediately do the analysis, but let's understand it by gender. You can infer anonymously. There's a number of things you can do, but you have this immense amount of data that can be very properly and legally used to give you not just tomorrow's or the view from 2 weeks ago, but like now.
Yeah,
like
right.
a
Real
minute
time.
ago.
Yeah.
Real time.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And thinking about that, there's no reason you couldn't take that idea in store. It doesn't have to just be the call center, right? Understanding what people are thinking, sentiment when they're standing in front of your bakery department or in produce or whatever. And, it could very well be Amazon is headed there, right? As they've brought Alexa into their fresh banner stores, right? Which I think was a phenomenal move to provide Alexa there as a customer service agent, because it's typically pretty hard to find a human being to ask questions of, but to be able to go up to one of the Alexa stations in the store and ask,
Absolutely.
how do I choose the right avocado?
Yeah, or even accessibility issues, right? I mean, think about,
Yes.
somebody who's, visually impaired. I mean, to be able to shop, extend e-commerce. I mean, it's just amazing. So
extremely inclusive technology. And Gary, to your great, example there's another one I'll just put in parallel of, we've got a startup that is part of the Open Voice Network. They are doing kind of a listening thing at the pharmacy. Again, you have to be very careful with the data. You have to anonymize it, complete respect for HIPAA and everything else. But as an early indicator, is a flu epidemic, is a something happening? What are they asking for? What are the issues of like public health? Just by listening.
Yeah.
Right.
As an idea. So again, it's enormous.
Right.
Enormous wealth and value in the data. It's remarkable.
Yeah, it gets pretty wild, thinking about someone's, using voice to order their groceries, the system picking up some indicator of a health condition and injecting in the middle of that, gee, you should buy this instead of that.
Yeah, that's scary, right? I mean, I guess the
yeah. Yeah,
I can imagine a lot of mimicry artists coming up here and trying to spoof the network here. But that apart, I think there's obviously these data issues and about voice, but from a services, in terms of retail, what do you think it does to the retail business model? I mean, does it change retail fundamentally if voice gets adopted widely? And then secondly, do retailers who don't adopt voice, who don't build these voice interfaces, do they stand to lose? It's like e-commerce, right? If you're a retailer today and you don't have a website and you don't have e-commerce, you're gonna lose in the marketplace, period, right? So do you see voice becoming like that? Hey, this retailer doesn't have a voice interface. That's like, how can you, that's so yesterday. I mean, you have to have, do you see that happening as a channel?
Down the road. Right now, no, I would lose my credibility badge if I said, oh, you have to have voice, no.
Right.
But I would say this, and I see that there are two major threads, two major transitions that perhaps are unfolding. One is the increased need for very sharp, real-time customer service in a digital ordering and multi-channel fulfillment age. When do I pick it up? Where is it? Who is it shipped by? When will I receive it? And, most of us are betting that, yes, there may be some plateauing in terms of even digital grocery post COVID-19, but it's not going to drop down back to where it was.
Right.
And so that need for service, that need for knowledge of your consumer and providing that to your shopper, very accurate, very fast, and no problem. You're not waiting for the call center,
Right.
Bing, you get it. So that's one. And I think that is right now, I would say that's a value proposition.
Right. Do you see a time where you think hardware and services are going to be separated? Kind of like the computer and the browser.
Without question.
Right?
Without question.
I mean, so because right now the assistants are tied, the hardware, server, and the services are tied to a specific company, right? So you can't use a Google Home Assistant with a Siri, right? Because the device and the service are intrinsically tied up together.
Well,
But
that's
you
one of
see
the
a
things.
right? I can see that happening where you have device manufacturers who have smart voice assistants, but you get to choose which service you want to go through because you feel that, hey, I think Echo is smarter than this, so I'm going to use that service and tie it into your hardware. Do you see that happening as well?
We see that a lot, and there's a couple things. One is the conversational agent, which is the phrase we use, and the voice assistant system. So an agent sits on top of a system. The system is what gathering and grabbing the data. It's going to be completely separate from hardware. Second is that the hardware, if you ask yourself, and this is one that when I first saw the data, I thought, no, can't be true. You say, okay, US, #1 voice user in the world, apart from China, but let's talk Western world. What are the most used voice hardware devices in order? Well, smartphone #1, car #2, smart home #3, smart speaker #4. And so we're betting on smartphone and car. And smart speaker may just begin to, not it's going to go away, but as the software becomes decoupled from the hardware, it's going to head in that direction. We will take a conversational agent with us everywhere we go. And in fact, the futurists say everything's going to be AI, right? And every AI will be conversational.
Right.
So the AI is talking to the AIs.
Right. Yep. Right. So this is reminding me of the movie Her.
Wanted to bring up another thing though, back to your initial question. I talked about the service, and that's something happening right now, but I think I've heard Gary speak of this, I've heard others, speak on this trend, is the trend toward brands becoming platforms. Walmart with their membership program, Best Buy with their just announced membership program. The move, it's products and services, or it's products as services, it's replenishment, it's knowing about my customer and then fulfilling that in various ways. Voice is the perfect interaction technology. Do you want it again? Would you like a refill?
Right. I mean,
your propane is low. Would you like us to ship another propane tank for your grill?
Absolutely, John. Sure. In fact, I can see brands saying, I want my own custom voice in the response. I don't want the standard voice that comes from the voice assistant. So if I'm Ralph Lauren and you're asking me a question through a voice assistant, I want the Ralph Lauren branded voice to respond to you, right? Absolutely.
And you want the Ralph Lauren branded voice assistant to be in the Ralph Lauren voice. So it's going to be very waspish and New England, Long Island, Hamptons, all this.
Yep.
And because when we talk about, the marketers talk about brand voice, well, my goodness, you will have a brand voice. One of the questions when we had that first meeting with that CEO back in 2017, it led to the standards conversation. One of the questions we asked this very distinguished gentleman said, what does your brand sound like? Male or female? Cute and cheeky, or kind of grandma and knows everything and very wise? Or is there a family of brands under your banner? Do you have, when you're talking about selling juniors, do you have young and cheeky and hip? When you're, what does it sound like? What does your brand sound like?
Yeah.
Because now we control voice. We control brand voice.
No, I think it's pretty exciting. I mean, and I think also opens up to a whole, I'm pretty sure there's a ton of startups already working in this space and thinking about some of these things. But I think these will all open up amazing opportunities in terms of how, in the next 10 years, our interaction as consumers with retail is going to transform itself really completely different. I think obviously COVID has done something in terms of accelerating digital engagement. I think people are more dependent on their phones and their iPads and their tablets now more than they ever were before. And I think, it's natural that I don't see the phone that we hold in our hand sticking around for very long. I mean, I think in 10 years from now, we're going to be looking at this and like, can you imagine we had a tiny screen that we had to look into and kind of carefully, place our fingers on this tiny keyboard instead of just being able exactly, right? It's so clumsy. And I can see voice being the natural transition of this entire thing, but clearly there's a lot of work that has to be done because you have all these intermediaries sitting in terms of data transfer until it gets to the end destination, which is going to respond back. So, I mean, it's amazing. I think what you guys are doing is just fantastic. I think it's very visionary because you've clearly seen that this is a trend that's going to take over. And if we don't have standards and guidelines, it's going to be chaos out there. So.
Yeah, and as John's called out, just a massive amount of work simply identifying what those issues are, right? And trying to understand what they are. Because this is a new world.
Yeah, and I think even for retailers to step into this space and offer some voice-based services, they obviously don't want to put themselves at risk in terms of data and ownership. And what do we do if a customer says, "I want you to delete all my voice records"? And how do we do that? And I mean, there's just so many questions that come out of this. So, I mean, while I guess what you're saying is while the technology is so exciting, we've got to be thinking about all these things ahead of time before we can get into a position of rolling it out, across retail. Right?
I was in a session this morning, and to your great points, both of you just made, a very wise individual, and this was a voice conference, said, let's keep in mind, it's not about the technology. It's about how the technology is used by humans. It's about how the technology is incorporated into business processes. It's how all this comes together.
Right.
The technology will evolve, and it needs to evolve, and it's got to be better than it is right now. We know that. But this is ultimately about such things as, will your voice assistant, will your conversational agent interoperate with others? Can't right now. It's got to.
Yeah.
Will we protect data, your commercial data? And can we give you guidance about how you handle your customers' data? Biomarker, biometric, this, that, sentiment, whatever else. Can people find you? Right now we have, in the digital world, we have a DNS. You can find the website, right? Type it in. I want to go to target.com, bing, Target comes up. There are 100,000 skills on Amazon. How do you find them? Let alone, how does anyone claim their name? So we're working to set up what's called a voice registry system. It's like a DNS for voice. So you can claim your vocalized name. And then, but then you have to think, well, gosh, there's Kohl's in Menominee Falls, Wisconsin, and there's Kohl's in Melbourne, Australia. And the fact they're spelled differently doesn't matter.
Right.
So we got to figure that out.
Yeah.
But those are the kind of things, those are the kind of things we're trying to figure out.
It's interesting. It's so interesting. No, I mean, this is a fascinating conversation. It's been very unique, Gary, because typically we've talked about, retail and data and, how do we understand customers? And I think when you bring a whole new medium of interaction to retail, it changes the paradigm in more ways than you can even imagine because, it's like, I don't know if you've been on Clubhouse much, John, but I've been on for a couple of months. And one of the things I find fascinating about it is it's like no other social media, right? Because you're able to interact live with people and speak back to them. And I think there's something so endearing about voice that creates a connection so much faster than an email between two people, right? And I think there's an emotional side to voice interaction that I think we haven't really truly understood what the implications of that are. Because I think from a brand perspective and a retailer perspective, I mean, it's such a wonderful way of connecting with a customer, right? If I like a customer's voice and I like how they respond to me, I mean, now you're humanizing an entire brand in a way that never thought possible. And I think it brings up all these psychological aspects to what brand loyalty means now.
We're bringing in a completely new dimension into our brand communication. It's
That's
not
right.
only what we say, but how we say it.
That's
Right.
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 Yeah.
John, so question for you. I know a number of the larger retailers are looking at voice. They're looking at how they should get involved, chatbots, et cetera. Are there different resources available on Open Voice Network's website or somewhere that they should be looking at to understand some of these different issues, maybe get some guidance on data protection, so on and so forth?
Gary, we're setting a number of things up. Where we have the most information for listeners to this would be in the realm of privacy. And we have just published our first guidance on voice specific privacy. What are the things to think about? What are the issues? And so there's an early guidance there. And we're going through the very proper criticism process of people saying, oh, I haven't thought about this. So we're in that process, but that's a start. We also have created a commerce community. And what we're doing there is bringing folks together and putting in front of them a use case. So it's kind of Shark Tank for voice.
Okay.
Here's a use case. Here's where voice is suggested. I have an idea. I think voice could do this. Well, then we have some retailers, then we have some technologists, then we have some ethicists, then we have some, one or two legal people. Oh, really? I'm not sure. And so we're working through use cases within that community. And so that's another area, and we're documenting those. So those will be on our website also soon.
All right, terrific.
No, that's great. No, I know if there's listeners out there who want to ask Jon questions, you're more than welcome to send us an email at retailperch@birdseye.com, and we'll try to get Jon back on the show to answer some of your questions in his own voice. More importantly, right? That's
at least important. You think it's his voice. It may or may not be right. Jon sitting there.
That is true. That's true. We'll have to figure that one out. But Gary, I think we say this on every show, right? Because we have some amazing people here coming on Retail Perch, and look at the time. It's just whizzed by, right? So we've been talking to Jon for 45 minutes, and it feels like we just got started. And Jon, it feels like we could talk to you all day, because I think this stuff is so fascinating. And
thank you.
We're so respectful and appreciative of the work that you guys do, because I think while standards and guidelines in itself can be tedious and mundane, and stuff that you got to go through, it's detail oriented. It is so important for the adoption, the ethical adoption of a technology, that I think I can see the day where in a few years from now, will this become widespread, everybody's going to know of the work that amazing work that you guys have done to actually establish some of these standards. So thank you for being on the show. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, my pleasure. And from your lips to God's ears. We've got a long way to go, but it's necessary for this to grow to the benefit of the most. And that's what we're trying to do.
And and honestly, it takes people who can see into the future to say that, hey, this is a trend that's going to happen, and we've got to think about these things before it becomes the Wild West. We got to set these rules up, and and technology is growing at a pace that's unbelievable, and I think we need people who can kind of think of the future, see the trends, and put these guidelines in place so that everybody's privacy is protected. And I think more importantly, people feel comfortable about using a technology, and it's not relegated to some Wild West, a small domain of people who don't care, right? So deeply appreciate that. Thank you so much for being on the show. And
my
Gary,
pleasure.
Thank you. Add anything here?
Jon, this is great. Really appreciate you joining us today. And Shekar mentioned, love to get you back on a few months down the road. I think as other areas of technology, voice is evolving and moving fast. And so I know there's going to be regular updates here as you continue your work and the Open Voice Network goes forward here. So thank you for being with us today.
Thank you both for the opportunity.
Absolutely. And Jon, by the way, for getting on the show, this is what you get. You get the mug. So,
fantastic.
please do send us your mailing address. We'll make sure the mug gets to you. And next time you're on the show, we can have a cup of coffee together. So
I'd love that.
Yeah, that'll be fantastic. But, you know, I mean, I think this has been so unique in so many ways, Gary, because we like I said, you know, we talk about a lot of things related to retail, but we have not seldom talked about things that are in the future that are not really live now, but it's so obvious that this is going to happen, right? And having a conversation.
It's happening.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
It's happening.
Yeah,
it's happening.
It's happening. There's no question about it.
So retailers need to be aware of what's going on in this space right now, because, you know, for example, Amazon, they're already moving here.
That's right.
So,
and you take a look at the top 10 retailers, just you can use the Deloitte study, top 10.
Yeah.
They're all doing voice.
Right. Right.
Yep.
And you go down the list. Oh, well, I don't know if it's going to be real or not. Stop.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Stop.
Yeah.
It's not. Yeah.
Yeah. That's not the question.
No.
No, absolutely. Well, folks, I hope you enjoyed this conversation as much as me and Gary have. I feel, Gary, we're very envious position here because we get to talk to these amazing people and have these amazing conversations. But I really want to appreciate the time that you spent here with us, Jon. It's been incredibly enlightening for me personally. And thanks, Gary, for bringing Jon on. And we'd love to have you back on in a few months.
It would
Jon,
be my pleasure whenever. And thank you for what you're both doing here in this kind of conversation. Critical for the industry. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And I also want to give a big shout out to Stephanie Doherty, who actually puts this together. And she carefully edits out her name every time I say it. So I think I want to say it 10 times in the show so she can't edit it out. But she's been amazing in terms of putting this entire podcast together. Gary and I just get on and chat for 45 minutes, but she really makes the magic happen. So thank you, Stephanie, and the entire team that puts this together. We are going to be back in the next couple of weeks with some amazing guests coming up in the next couple of weeks, Gary. So I guess we've got to sharpen, you know, I'm going to listen to a few more Joe Rogan episodes to figure out how to be the perfect podcast host, I think. So.
I think you're doing pretty good so far, Shekar. So.
Well, yeah. Anyway, thank you so much again, Jon. Gary, anything before we close out here?
No, another great session. Jon, thanks for being with us today. And
Pleasure.
Shekar, I'm sure we'll be talking soon.
Absolutely. See you guys later, and stay safe, stay healthy, get your vaccines, do your social distancing, and let's end this thing and live life again. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Make sure to join us every Monday and connect with us at The Retail Perch on Instagram and Facebook.
And if you have any questions, feel free to email us at theretailperch@birdseye.com.
Until next time, this is Shekar.
And this is Gary, signing off.